My name is Iris DeWood, and the night I turned 18, my father leaned close to me during my birthday party and quietly told me something that changed everything. When everyone leaves tonight, he said with a smile, you're going to sign a few papers for your Uncle Wade. Nothing complicated. Just routine paperwork. I smiled back. I nodded. I acted exactly the way he expected me to. Then I slipped into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and spent the next 20 minutes making sure that every asset my grandparents had left behind was protected behind an irrevocable trust that nobody in my family could touch. The next morning, my father discovered the truth. My mother discovered the truth. My uncle discovered the truth. And the moment they realized the lake cabin, the savings accounts, the investments, and everything else, my grandparents had spent a lifetime building were legally out of reach. The color drained from their faces. My uncle had already signed a contract to sell property he didn't own. My father had already made plans for money that was never his. And neither of them knew that my grandparents had anticipated every move, years before they made it. Before I tell you how that happened, let me take you back 6 years. Back to a small cabin on Cedar Lake. Back to the summer I was 12 years old. Back to the moment my grandfather said something that sounded simple at the time but turned out to be the most important lesson of my life. The cabin sat near the edge of Cedar Lake, hidden behind towering white pines that blocked the afternoon sunlight. The place wasn't impressive. The porch leaned slightly to one side. The screen door never closed properly. The paint was peeling in spots. But to me, it felt more like home than any place I'd ever known. Every Saturday morning that summer, Grandpa Harold would pick me up in his old pickup truck. We'd drive 40 minutes along winding roads until the trees opened and the lake appeared. Then we'd spend the day fixing something. One weekend it was fence posts. Another weekend it was roof shingles. Sometimes we'd repair loose boards or patch leaks. Grandpa believed every building had a story, and every repair was part of keeping that story alive. Grab the other end, he told me one morning while lifting a weathered fence rail. I grabbed it. Together we carried it toward the southern property line. The wood was rough against my palms. Sweat rolled down my neck, but I loved every second of it. Grandpa never treated me like a child who needed constant supervision. He treated me like someone capable of learning. If the wood feels soft, he explained, pressing his thumb into a rotting post, it's finished. Doesn't matter how good it looks from the outside. At 12 years old, I thought he was talking about fences. Years later, I realized he wasn't. Inside the cabin, Grandma Vivian always had lunch waiting. Usually iced tea, usually sandwiches, always served at the kitchen table. Grandpa had built with his own hands shortly after they got married. The table wasn't perfect. The corners were uneven. The finish had worn thin over decades, but it was solid, just like the people who sat around it. After lunch, Grandma would settle onto the porch with a book while I sat beside her watching sunlight dance across the lake. One evening, as the sky turned gold, Grandpa joined us. He stood at the railing for a long moment before speaking. This cabin stays in the family, he said quietly. I nodded. That seemed obvious. Then he added something I didn't understand. But family isn't always blood, Iris. I looked up. What does that mean? He smiled. It means family is the people who show up. At 12 years old, I thought he was being philosophical. I thought it was one of those adult sayings that sounded important but didn't really mean anything. I couldn't have been more wrong. That entire summer became a lesson in responsibility. Grandpa showed me every inch of the property. He pointed out the boundary markers he had installed himself years earlier. He taught me where the water shutoff valve was located. He showed me which windows stuck during humid weather. He explained how to bleed the radiator before winter arrived. Grandma taught me different lessons. She showed me how small details made a house feel alive. She organized bookshelves by color. Because she said warm colors made rooms feel friendlier, she planted flowers in places most people wouldn't notice. She remembered everyone's favorite meals. Everything she did carried the same message. Take care of the things you love. I didn't realize it then, but while I was learning how to maintain the cabin, my grandparents were quietly making plans to protect it. Back home, things felt different. Not bad, just different. Our house in Ridgemont was perfectly normal. 3 bedrooms, small yard, attached garage, nothing wrong with it. But it never felt warm the way the cabin did. My younger sister, Kelsey, was 10 years old and unquestionably the favorite child. She had the larger bedroom, new furniture, fresh paint, expensive decorations. When she won a school award, it immediately found a place on the living room wall. When I won something, it usually stayed in my backpack. One evening during dinner, my father brought up the cabin. That property is losing value every year, he said while cutting into his steak. Taxes alone are ridiculous. My mother nodded. Honestly, your father's probably right. I looked up. Grandpa says the cabin should stay in the family. Dad laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a dismissive one. The kind adults use when they think a child doesn't understand reality. You were 12 when he said that, Iris. I know. He was being sentimental. The conversation ended there. Nobody asked what I thought. Nobody cared. A few minutes later, they were celebrating Kelsey's debate competition trophy. Everyone admired the certificate already hanging on the wall. 2 weeks earlier, I'd won the district science fair. My ribbon was still sitting inside my backpack upstairs. After dinner, while clearing dishes, I noticed something lying on the kitchen counter. A glossy real estate flyer. Lakefront property wanted. Premium offers available. The company name at the top read Ridgeline Development. A phone number had been written in pen across one corner. I stared at it for several seconds. Someone in my family had already started thinking about selling the cabin. I carefully placed the flyer exactly where I found it and walked upstairs. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because of the money, because of what the cabin represented. To my grandparents, it wasn't property. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't land. It was memories, history, family, and someone was already measuring its value in dollars. 2 years later, Grandpa Harold died. I was 14. The funeral took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Clouds covered the sky. The grass was damp beneath our shoes. I sat silently in the second row, holding one of Grandpa's old handkerchiefs. The blue plaid fabric still smelled faintly of pine trees. At the reception afterward, I noticed my father standing with his brother Wade near the dessert table. Neither of them was eating. They were talking quietly. Wade held a folder under one arm. Both men looked serious. I walked past just in time to hear a single sentence. We should move before probate gets complicated. I knew immediately what they were discussing. The cabin. Their father hadn't even been buried for a full day. And they were already talking about property. I said nothing. I was 14 years old. I had no power, no influence, no idea that my grandfather had already prepared for exactly this moment. And that preparation would eventually change all of our lives. 2 years passed after Grandpa Harold's funeral. I was 16 when everything shifted again. Grandma Vivian's health began to decline slowly at first, then all at once. By March, she was still living at home. By June, she was gone. The last time I saw her alive, she was sitting upright in her bed, her hand wrapped tightly around mine. Stronger than I expected. Her eyes were tired, but still clear. Iris, she whispered, the cabin is yours. I froze. She squeezed my hand again. Don't let them take it, she said. Promise me. My throat tightened. I promise, Grandma. She nodded once, as if that was all she needed, and then closed her eyes again. She passed away 3 days later. The funeral felt like a repeat of the one before it. Gray sky, folding chairs sinking slightly into wet ground, the same quiet conversations happening in corners that should have stayed silent. And once again, I saw my father and Uncle Wade standing together, talking about sorting things out. This time, I understood exactly what that meant. After the reception, I overheard my father in the kitchen. Now we can finally handle the property, he said, almost relieved, like something inconvenient had finally been removed. That same evening, Wade called him. I heard my father pacing in the garage, phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, he said, we should move forward. His tone was lighter than I had heard in weeks. I stood in the hallway holding a glass of water, listening. And that was the moment it hit me. My grandmother's death wasn't a loss to them. It was an opportunity, a clearance, a door finally opening. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I just made a decision. Quiet. Firm, even though I didn't yet know what I would do with it. Between 16 and 17, the cabin became mine in a way that had nothing to do with paperwork. It became my escape. Every weekend, I drove there in an old used Honda I had saved up for with part-time babysitting money. I learned the rhythm of the place the way my grandparents once had. I patched leaks in the porch screen. I replaced weather stripping around doors. I swept pine needles off the roof after storms. I checked windows for drafts before winter. Each visit felt less like maintenance and more like protection. At home, things changed in subtle but steady ways. The cabin stopped being Grandpa's place. It became family property. My father said it casually at dinner one night, like it had always been that way. My Uncle Wade started showing up more often, sometimes with folders, sometimes with property listings open on his laptop, sometimes just sitting at the kitchen table talking numbers. I tried once to push back. What about Grandma's wish? I asked. She wanted me to keep it. My mother didn't even look surprised. She just placed her fork down gently. Your grandmother was emotional at the end, Iris, she said. This is business. That word stayed with me. Business. As if love could be rewritten as math. By the time I was 17, the pressure became more direct. We'll sort it out when you turn 18, my father said one night. The way he said it made it sound final, like the outcome had already been decided. One afternoon in November, while cleaning the cabin alone, I found something unexpected. Behind an old stack of quilts in a closet, there was a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front, Grandma Vivian's handwriting. My hand shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single business card. Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law. Below her name, one line stood out. Tremaine Family Trust. I sat down on the wooden floor. The cabin suddenly felt different. Not abandoned. Not forgotten. Prepared. It was like Grandma had placed a thread in time and tied it directly to me. A way out. Or a way forward. I slipped the card into my wallet and didn't tell anyone. Not yet. 3 months before my 18th birthday, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Iris Tremaine? A woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Margaret Caldwell. I was your grandparents' attorney. Her tone was calm, controlled, professional. But underneath it, something serious. I need to meet you before your birthday, she said. There are things you need to understand. And there isn't much time. We met the following Saturday. Her office was small, quiet, walls lined with files and old legal books. She sat across from me and opened a thick folder. Your grandparents established an irrevocable trust 6 years ago, she said. The cabin, investments, savings accounts, everything is held inside it. I blinked. You are the sole beneficiary. The room felt suddenly too small. Wait, everything? She nodded. The total value is approximately $2.1 million. My breath caught. They transferred everything while they were still alive? She continued. Legally, it never entered probate. I stared at the documents in front of me. My name was already there, like it had been waiting. So my dad? My uncle? I couldn't finish the sentence. They have no legal claim, she said. Then she added something quieter. Your grandfather predicted they would try. She turned a page in the file and read, My sons will sell that cabin before the funeral flowers wilt. I went still. Margaret continued, There's one more thing. Someone has recently been making inquiries about the property title. That sentence changed everything. From that day forward, I stopped being unaware. I started noticing the way conversations paused when I entered a room, the way my uncle's visits became more frequent, the way real estate talk started sounding less like discussion and more like planning. Then I heard it, accidentally, or maybe not. One evening, I passed the garage door slightly open. Inside, my father and Uncle Wade were talking. Wade's voice was sharp. I already have a buyer lined up. Ridgeline Development. We just need clean title. My father hesitated. How do we get it clean? Quitclaim deed. We transfer it as heirs. File it. Done. My stomach tightened. And Iris? My father asked quietly. She's 17, Wade replied. She can't stop anything. A pause. She'll get over it. That night, I texted Margaret 2 words. They're accelerating. Her reply came almost immediately. Stay quiet. We're close. And for the first time, I understood exactly what kind of storm I was standing in front of, and that I wasn't the one who started it. From that point on, I stopped reacting and started watching. Not openly, not obviously, just quietly paying attention to everything happening around me. I was still 17, still expected to sit at the dinner table, still expected to smile and nod when conversations turned into plans. I was never asked to approve, but now I knew what was underneath all of it. The urgency, the calculations. The way my father and Uncle Wade started speaking about the cabin like it was already theirs, like ownership was just a technicality waiting to be fixed. 5 days before my 18th birthday, my mother sat down beside me on the couch. Her voice was softer than usual, carefully chosen. We should talk about family decisions, she said. Together, she added quickly. That word again. Together. As if including me in the sentence meant including me in the decision. The cabin is expensive to maintain, she continued. Taxes, insurance, the repairs. Your father's business has been struggling. If we sell it, it could stabilize everything. College funds for you and Kelsey. I looked at her. Grandma wanted me to keep it. A small pause. Then she sighed, like I had said something emotional instead of factual. Iris, she was very sentimental at the end. But sentiment doesn't pay bills. That night, my father came home early. Too early. Like he had been waiting for her to soften me up first. I've already talked to a buyer. he said casually while hanging up his coat. A development company. Good offer. What company? I asked. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Ridgeline something, he said. They're reputable. Ridgeline. The name landed like a weight in my chest. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. My father smiled like that was the answer he wanted. That night, my younger sister Kelsey knocked on my door. She was holding her phone in both hands, nervous in a way she didn't fully understand. Mom and Dad keep talking about the cabin, she said quietly. They think I'm asleep, but I hear them. I sat down beside her. What do they say? They sound excited, she said, but also stressed, like something big is happening. She hesitated. Is something wrong? I pulled the blanket over her knees. No, I lied gently. Just grown-up problems. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Wade showed up unannounced. Of course he did. He always appeared right when pressure was highest. He leaned against his car in the driveway like he had just happened to be nearby. But nothing about Wade was accidental. Hey, Iris, he said with a smile. Got a minute? Just uncle to niece. We sat on the front steps. He spoke calmly, almost friendly, but his eyes never stopped measuring me. The lake property is worth around $450, he said. Easy. I've got a buyer ready. Clean close. No delays. And what do I get? I asked. He smiled like I had already agreed. $50,000. For college. Not bad for someone your age. I let the numbers sit between us. $50,000. Out of $450. I tilted my head slightly. Whose name is on the deed, Uncle Wade? A flicker crossed his face. Just for a second. Then it was gone. Your grandparents, he said smoothly. But they're gone now. So it passes to next of kin. He said it like law. Not like assumption. Not like hope. Like fact. I'll think about it, I said again. Wade stood up, satisfied. Don't overthink it, he said. Opportunities don't wait. He drove away a minute later. Before his car even reached the end of the street, I saw him on the phone. Already moving. That night, I texted Margaret again. They're pushing harder. Her reply came instantly. 3 days. Stay steady. 3 days. That was all I had to hold. The night before my birthday, I went to the cabin alone. The drive felt longer than usual. The road quiet, almost empty. When I arrived, the lake was still and dark under a thin moonlight. The trees along the shore looked like shadows cut out of the sky. I walked up the porch steps. The second step still creaked the same way it always had. Inside, everything smelled like pine and old wood. Like memory itself. I sat in the chair my grandfather used to sit in, the one facing the water. I opened my laptop. Margaret had sent everything. Final documents, acceptance forms, trust confirmation, all carefully prepared, all waiting for his signature. At midnight, I read them twice, slowly, carefully, not because I didn't understand them, but because I understood exactly what they meant. Once I signed, everything changed. Not just legally, personally, irreversibly. I closed the laptop and looked out at the lake. Grandpa's voice came back to me. Patience isn't weakness. It's timing. I used to think he meant fishing. Now I knew better. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From weight. From the pressure of everything converging into one moment. I didn't cry loudly. There was no breakdown. Just silence breaking inside me piece by piece. Because I could see it now. My father wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to extract. My uncle wasn't confused. He was opportunistic. And my mother wasn't neutral. She had chosen a side. I wiped my face, closed the laptop, locked the cabin, and drove home. At exactly 11:45 p.m., I set my alarm. My birthday was coming, and so was the moment everything would change. Downstairs, my family slept peacefully, believing tomorrow would be just another birthday. They had no idea they were already late. At 11:50 p.m., my room was completely silent. The house had that heavy nighttime stillness, where even small sounds feel louder than they should. Greg and Denise had gone to bed an hour earlier. Kelsey's lights were off. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. An unknown calm settled over me, not peace, not relief, but focus. Margaret Caldwell joined the video call within seconds. Her office light was still on. Stacks of documents sat neatly in front of her. Ready? She asked. Yes, I said. Her voice stayed steady. Once the clock hits midnight, you are legally an adult. I'll guide you through the signing. Everything has already been prepared. I nodded. She reviewed it one last time. The acceptance of successor beneficiary form. The document that would transfer full authority of the irrevocable trust into my control. Simple on paper. Life-altering in reality. Midnight. she said quietly. We signed then. I waited. The clock ticked closer. Each second felt heavier than the last. 11:58, 11:59, and then midnight. Happy birthday, Margaret said softly. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I suddenly understood the weight of what that meant. I wasn't just turning 18. I was stepping into something my grandparents had prepared years in advance. A system designed not for celebration, but protection. Begin signing, Margaret said. My cursor moved. My name appeared on the document. Slowly, carefully. Final. When I finished, Margaret leaned back slightly. It's done, she said. Silence filled the space after that. Not empty silence. Complete silence. From this moment, I was the legal beneficiary of the Tremaine Family Irrevocable Trust. Everything my grandparents had built, cabin, accounts, investments, now existed under my authority. And no one else's. Margaret continued. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I'll file Ellis pendens at the county recorder's office. That will place a legal notice on the property. Nothing can be sold, transferred, or altered while it's active. I stared at the screen. And if they try before that, then it will be rejected immediately once the notice is recorded, she said. I exhaled slowly. Are they going to try? I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. Yes. There was no fear in her voice, just certainty. Your grandfather anticipated this exact situation, she added. That's why everything is structured the way it is. I looked down at my signed name. It didn't feel powerful. It felt heavy, like responsibility had a physical form. Should I tell them? I asked quietly. Margaret adjusted her glasses. No, she said. Your grandfather specifically instructed that you not negotiate, only execute. I nodded. Then the call ended. At 12:03 a.m., I was 18, and everything was now in motion. Across town, I didn't know it yet, but Uncle Wade was already preparing documents. Printing, signing, moving pieces on a board he believed he understood. He had a purchase agreement ready with Ridgeline Development, $450,000. A deal built on assumptions he never bothered to verify. He had already told Greg everything would be simple. Quick claim deed, he said earlier that night. We file it first thing in the morning. Clean transfer. Done before she even reacts. Greg hesitated. She might fight it. Wade laughed. She's 18 tomorrow. She won't even understand what's happening. What he didn't know was that by the time he filed anything, the property would already be legally frozen. At 11:30 p.m., Wade called Greg again. Everything's ready. We file at 9. Just make sure Iris stays distracted with birthday stuff. Greg agreed. Not because he was certain, but because he was afraid. The next morning would decide everything. But none of them realized the decision had already been made. At 8 a.m., Margaret walked into the county recorder's office. She carried a leather folder and didn't waste a single word. She submitted the trust documentation, then the list pendants filing. The clerk reviewed everything carefully, stamped it, filed it, recorded. Done. From that moment forward, the Cedar Lake property carried a legal warning visible on every search, every record, every attempt to transfer ownership. Pending legal interest. Tremaine Family Trust. Beneficiary Iris Tremaine. At 8:14 a.m., Margaret called me. It's done, she said. They can't move anything now. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal. The house was still normal around me. Footsteps upstairs. A cabinet closing. The sound of a morning routine that had no idea it was already collapsing. At 8:30, my father and Uncle Wade left together. Greg didn't say much. Neither did Wade. Both believed they were going to finalize something. Both believed time was still on their side. As they walked out, I said quietly, "Good luck." Greg paused for a second, then kept walking. I rinsed my bowl, placed it in the cabinet, and waited. 9:05 a.m. The county recorder's office was quiet in the way government buildings always are in the morning, bright fluorescent lights, low conversation, the soft tapping of keyboards behind the counter. Wade walked in first, confident, controlled. A folder tucked neatly under his arm like he owned the outcome already. Greg followed behind him, hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed but failing just slightly. They approached the counter together. The clerk greeted them without much emotion. Wade slid the document forward. Quitclaim deed. Simple. Clean. At least that's what he thought. We just need this recorded, Wade said smoothly. Transfer between heirs? The clerk began typing. Parcel number. Property address. System lookup. Then she paused. Typed again. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture did. I can't record this, she said. Wade blinked. Excuse me? She turned the monitor slightly. This property is not in your family members' names. Greg frowned. What are you talking about? It's our parents' cabin. The clerk shook her head. The title is held under the Tremaine Family Irrevocable Trust. Wade let out a short laugh. That's not possible. Then she added the second line. And there is a lis pendens filed this morning. Silence. The kind that feels physically wrong in a public space. Greg leaned forward. A what? The clerk remained calm. A legal notice of pending interest. Filed by the trustee. Wade's grip tightened on the folder. That's impossible, he repeated, but his voice had already changed. Smaller now. Less certain. Who filed it? Greg asked. The clerk scanned the record. Margaret Caldwell. That name landed like a strike. Wade froze. Greg turned slightly toward him. You said there was no trust, Greg said quietly. Wade didn't answer immediately. The confidence he walked in with was gone, replaced by something tighter, something defensive. I didn't know about any trust, he finally said. Greg's voice sharpened. You sell real estate for a living, Wade? You didn't check the title? Wade opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. The clerk leaned forward slightly. If there's nothing else, gentlemen, I'll need you to step aside. They stepped away from the counter, not together, not aligned anymore. Margaret was sitting in the waiting area near the entrance. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She just watched them leave the counter, spaced like someone observing a result she had already calculated. At 9:22 a.m., my phone rang. Greg, I answered. What did you do? His voice snapped immediately. I stayed calm. I accepted what Grandma and Grandpa left me. You went behind our backs with the lawyer. You mean the lawyer they hired 6 years ago? Silence. Then breathing. Heavy. Controlled but breaking at the edges. This is my parents' property, he said. No, I replied. It never was. Another pause. Then the shift. We'll fight this, he said. You can try, I answered. But it's irrevocable. That word landed harder than anything else. He didn't respond right away. Then the call ended. No goodbye. Just silence. I set the phone down and waited again. An hour later, another call came in. Unknown number, I answered. This is Carter Briggs from Ridgeline Development, said. His voice was sharp, businesslike. We have a contract with Mr. Wade Tremaine regarding the Cedar Lake property. I'm aware, I said. There's a lis pendens filed, he continued. Yes. A pause. That means he doesn't have clear title. That's correct. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you telling me he doesn't own the property? He never did, I said. Silence again. Then his tone changed. More careful now. Ms. Tremaine, is there any possibility of a sale? No, I said immediately. Another pause. Understood, he replied. Then we'll pursue remedies against Mr. Tremaine directly. The call ended. That afternoon, Margaret called me. Her voice was steady, but there was something sharper underneath it. Iris, there's something you need to know. My stomach tightened. The quitclaim deed Wade attempted to file, she said, included a notary stamp. I frowned. So? I had the recorder's office verify it, she continued. It doesn't match any registered notary in the county. My breath slowed. It's fake. A pause. That's correct. The word settled heavily. Forgery. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Forgery. My uncle hadn't just tried to push boundaries. He had crossed them. Deliberately. Legally. Criminally. I didn't speak for a moment. Then I asked quietly, what happens now? Margaret didn't hesitate. That becomes a criminal investigation. I sat back in my chair. Outside, nothing had changed. Cars still passed. Birds still moved between trees. The world continued like nothing had shifted. But inside my family, everything already had. Greg came home at 2 p.m. He didn't slam the door. Didn't speak immediately. Just walked in slowly, like every step cost something. Denise was already in the kitchen. Arms crossed, face tight, waiting. I was at the dining table. Neither of them looked at me right away. Greg finally sat down. He stared at the wood grain for a long time before speaking. I'm going to lose everything, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was empty. Denise turned toward me. This is your family, she said sharply, and you're destroying it over a cabin. I met her eyes. It was never yours to sell. Greg leaned forward slightly. You don't understand what this is doing to us. I do, I said quietly, but I also understand what you tried to do. Silence filled the room. Heavy, thick. Then Greg exhaled. I don't know how to fix this. I didn't answer immediately, because there was nothing to fix in the way he meant it. Only consequences, and truth, and time. The next few weeks didn't explode all at once. They unraveled, slowly, piece by piece. Ridgeline Development filed a civil claim against Uncle Wade within days. breach of contract, misrepresentation. Damages tied to a failed transaction worth hundreds of thousands. The number alone was enough to shift everything around him. Then the district attorney's office opened a separate inquiry. The forged notary stamp wasn't a mistake in paperwork. It was evidence. Wade's real estate license was suspended, almost immediately pending investigation. No license meant no income. No income meant pressure. And pressure, I was learning, always finds somewhere to land. At first, Wade tried to call me. I didn't answer. Then he called Greg instead. I overheard part of the conversation through the thin wall between rooms. Greg's voice was colder than I had ever heard it. "You signed a fake document, Wade." "I didn't forge anything," Wade insisted. "I just used what I had." "That's not how law works," Greg said flatly. A pause. Then Wade, quieter now. "I thought it was clean." Greg let out a short laugh. "You're a real estate agent. You're supposed to verify this stuff." "I assumed." "That's your problem," Greg cut in. "You assumed." Silence. Then Greg ended the call. No warning. Just a click. For the first time since everything started, I heard something in my father that wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing the ground you were standing on was never stable. That night, Kelsey came to my room. She didn't knock, just opened the door slightly and stood there. "Is Uncle Wade in trouble?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She swallowed. "Is Dad?" I paused. "He's dealing with it." She nodded slowly, processing in the way only someone her age can, understanding pieces, but not the whole picture. "Did we do something wrong?" she asked quietly. I looked at her. "No," I said. "This isn't on you." She didn't look convinced. But she left anyway, and I stayed sitting there long after the door closed. Over the next 3 weeks, everything became public. Not in dramatic bursts. In documents. In filings. In quiet, official notices that carried more weight than any argument ever could. Ridgeline's lawsuit became part of the public record. The parcel number tied directly to Cedar Lake started appearing in discussions around town. People read without meaning to, then talked without realizing the damage it caused. By the second week, the story had spread. Not fully accurate, not fully understood, but enough. The version that circulated was simple. Harold Tremaine's granddaughter refused to let the cabin be sold, and his sons tried anyway. At school, no one said anything to me directly, but I could feel the shift. The way people looked a little longer than necessary. The way silence sometimes replaced conversation when I walked by. Wade called once more. I answered that time. "Iris," he said quickly, "just talk to your lawyer. Drop the list pendants. I can still fix this." "No," I said. "It's making everything worse," he insisted. "It's protecting the property," I replied. A pause. Then his voice dropped. "Your grandparents would be ashamed." That line hung in the air for a moment. Then I answered quietly, "My grandparents are the reason this exists in the first place." Silence. Then he hung up. After that, things accelerated again. Ridgeline officially amended their claim to include penalties for breach. Wade now owed money he didn't have. The pressure shifted from legal to financial. And financial pressure always turns personal. Greg didn't speak to me for nearly 2 weeks. Not out of anger. Out of something heavier. Avoidance. Denise moved through the house like she was constantly trying to hold something together that kept slipping through her hands. Then one afternoon, Nora Beckett came by. She didn't knock. Just walked in holding a pie like she had done it 100 times before. Apple. Still warm. She set it on the kitchen counter and looked at me directly. "You didn't break anything," she said quietly. I didn't respond. She continued anyway. "Your father made choices. So did your uncle. You're just the one who didn't ignore them." I nodded slowly. She placed a hand on my shoulder briefly, then left. No advice. No lecture. Just that. A few days later, Kelsey and I sat together again. This time on the porch of the cabin. The lake was still. Wind light. She ate pizza slowly, watching the water instead of me. "I didn't know anything about it," she said finally. "I know," I replied. She hesitated. "Am I a part of why everything happened?" I turned toward her. "No," I said firmly. "You were never part of it." She nodded, then leaned her head slightly against my shoulder. We didn't talk about the legal case. We didn't talk about Wade. We didn't talk about any of it. Instead, we talked about school, about the dock needing repairs, about how the heron kept returning every morning like it belonged, there more than anyone else. And for the first time in weeks, the cabin felt less like a battleground, and more like a place that still existed outside of all of it. Early the following morning, I sat on the porch alone. Mist rose off Cedar Lake in slow layers. The world was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just still And I finally understood something my grandparents had known long before I did. You don't protect something valuable by arguing for it. You protect it by building something stronger around it before anyone else even realizes it can be taken. And they had done exactly that, long before I ever understood why. The legal consequences didn't arrive all at once. They arrived in layers, like falling dominoes that each made their own distinct sound before the next one followed. Ridgeline Development escalated their lawsuit against Wade. What began as a simple breach of contract case turned into something much heavier once the falsified notary stamp was confirmed. Now it wasn't just about money. It was about intent and documentation and proof. The county investigator assigned to the case interviewed Wade within days. According to what eventually filtered back through legal channels, the conversation didn't go well. Wade tried to explain it as a misunderstanding, a shortcut, a standard procedure he insisted people sometimes used in real estate when families were involved. But none of it held up. Not against records, not against signatures, not against the trust documents that had already been filed years earlier. His real estate license was suspended indefinitely. No hearing date, no temporary reinstatement, just a quiet administrative shutdown that ended his career in a single line of text. At home, the impact was immediate. Wade stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped showing up at dinners where he used to act like everything was normal. Greg became quieter, not angry anymore, just drained, like something inside him had finally accepted a reality he didn't want to look at. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the living room after dinner. No television, no phone, just staring at nothing. I didn't know it was this bad, he said without looking at me. I didn't respond right away, because there was no version of that sentence that fixed anything. Eventually, I said, "You didn't want to know." He flinched slightly, but didn't argue. That was the first time I realized something important. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about everything that had been ignored long before the cabin ever mattered. Denise handled it differently. She stayed busy, cleaning, organizing, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, as if structure could replace control, as if order could undo consequence. But nothing in the house felt normal anymore, not even silence. Then one afternoon, I got another call from Margaret. Her tone was different this time. Not urgent, not sharp, just measured. "Iris," she said, "there's an update regarding Wade's case." I sat down instinctively. "The district attorney is reviewing criminal charges," she continued. "Forgery of a notary seal is being treated as a felony consideration." I closed my eyes briefly. "So it's real," I said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "it is." A pause. Then she added something softer. "You should also know Ridgeline has settled their claim against him." "With him?" I asked. "Yes, the penalty clause was enforced." The number she mentioned next wasn't small. It wasn't even close. Wade had accepted a financial settlement, structure he couldn't realistically afford without loans that would follow him for years, maybe decades. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, not feeling victorious, not feeling relieved, just still, because I was starting to understand something I hadn't fully accepted before. Winning wasn't the right word. Nothing about this had felt like winning. It felt more like watching systems work exactly as they were designed to, and realizing that design had consequences. Later that week, Wade called again. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. "Iris," he said immediately, no greeting, no warmth. "I need you to talk to your lawyer." "No," I said. "This is getting worse," he insisted. "If the Ellis pendants drops, I can renegotiate with Ridgeline." "It's not dropping," I said calmly. A pause. Then his voice shifted, anger creeping in. "You're destroying me." I let that sit, then replied, "No, you did that yourself." Silence, then breathing, then the line went dead. I set the phone down and didn't move for a while. Not because I felt powerful, but because I felt the absence of something I used to recognize as family. It didn't feel like loss in the traditional sense. It felt like distance that had been building long before I noticed it. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Nora Beckett stopped by the cabin again. She didn't bring pie this time, just herself. She sat on the porch without asking and looked out at the lake for a long time before speaking. "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing," she said. I nodded slightly. "I know." She glanced at me. "No," she said. "I mean exactly." Then she explained something I hadn't fully understood before, that Harold and Vivian hadn't just protected the property. They had structured everything around one assumption, that someone would try to take it, and that the only way to stop it wasn't confrontation. It was control built years in advance. Quiet, Lego. Final. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she stood up. People will talk, she said. They already are, but most of them don't know the full story. I don't need them to, I replied. She smiled faintly. No, she said. You don't. And then she left. That evening, Kelsey came by again. We sat on the porch like we had before, but this time she didn't ask questions about what happened. She just talked about school, about a history project, about a teacher she liked, about ordinary things that suddenly felt far away from everything else. And I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The cabin wasn't just where the conflict centered, it was also where it stopped spreading. A boundary, a line, a place where everything outside it didn't get to define what happened inside it. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Over the next month, the situation shifted again, but this time more quietly. Less chaos, more resolution. Ridgeline Development formally withdrew any expectation of a clean sale from Wade. The contract he had signed once his guaranteed deal was now legally unenforceable in any practical sense. Without clear title, there was nothing to purchase. And without a purchase, the pressure behind the entire situation started to collapse inward. What remained was liability. Wade's liability, the financial penalties tied to the broken agreement didn't disappear just because the deal failed. If anything, they became more real, more enforceable, more personal. He began restructuring debt almost immediately. Loans, payment plans, negotiations with banks that no longer trusted his projections. Every step forward cost him something else. And at home, the consequences were no longer abstract. They were visible. Greg started making calls late at night. Denise stopped pretending things were almost fine. And the house itself, once just a background, setting to everything, began to feel smaller, heavier, like the walls had started listening. One evening, Greg finally spoke to me again without tension in his voice. We were sitting at the kitchen table, no one else around, just the sound of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of a clock that suddenly felt too loud. I should have checked the trust, he said. I didn't answer immediately, because part of me had been waiting for him to say something like that for a long time. But hearing it didn't change what had already happened. So I simply said yes. He nodded once, slowly, like he already knew that was the only answer. I thought Wade had it handled, he added. You trusted him? I said. A pause. Then he looked at me properly for the first time in a long time. No, he said quietly. I wanted it to be handled. That was different, and I understood that. Because wanting something to be simple doesn't make it simple. It just makes you less careful. Denise didn't join that conversation. She stood in the doorway for a while listening, then walked away without saying anything. Not angry, not emotional, just distant, as if she didn't know where she belonged in the version of the story that was unfolding. A few days later, Margaret called again. This time her voice carried something final. Not urgency, not warning, closure. The civil matter between Ridgeline and Wade has reached a settlement, she said. I leaned forward slightly. He agreed to pay the penalty? Yes, she said, through a structured loan agreement. It will take years to resolve. I closed my eyes briefly. And the criminal investigation? I asked. A pause. Still active, she replied. The DA is reviewing whether to file felony charges or reduce it to a misdemeanor, depending on intent evidence. I didn't respond, because at that point, the legal outcome no longer felt like the center of the story. It felt like background noise to something bigger. What had already changed couldn't be reversed by charges or settlements. It had already happened in the space between people, between trust and loss, between expectation and reality. That weekend, I went to the cabin alone. The drive felt different now, not tense, not heavy, just familiar, like the road itself had stopped carrying uncertainty. When I arrived, the lake was calm. No wind, no movement except for faint ripples near the shore. I walked inside and didn't immediately sit down. Instead, I moved through each room slowly. The kitchen table, the porch steps, the window where Grandma used to sit, everything still intact, still steady, still exactly as it had been left. I sat down in Grandpa's chair on the porch. The wood creaked slightly under me, not breaking, just acknowledging weight. I looked out at the lake and thought about everything that had happened. Not the arguments, not the filings, not the phone calls, but the planning behind it all, the years of quiet preparation, the assumption that someone would try to take what didn't belong to them, and the certainty that it would need to be protected long before it ever became vulnerable. That was what I was sitting inside of. Not just a cabin, but a decision made long before I was old enough to understand it. Behind me, I noticed something on the desk inside the cabin. A letter, my name on the front, Grandpa Harold's handwriting. My chest tightened slightly. I already knew what it was. Margaret had mentioned it once in passing, that there would be something left for after everything settled. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, then finally sat back down on the porch and unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was slower than I remembered, more uneven toward the end. He wrote about the cabin first, not as property, not as value, but as memory, as time, as something built slowly, meant to outlast the people who built it. Then he wrote about Greg and Wade, not with anger, not even disappointment, just understanding. He said they would see it differently, that they always had. And then the final line, take care of what holds you steady, Iris. Everything else will shift. I folded the letter slowly and sat there longer than I meant to. The lake stayed still, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. After that weekend at the cabin, something subtle changed in how I saw everything else. Not the facts. Those were already set, but the weight of them. Like my life had stopped being a moving argument and started becoming something. Already decided, just unfolding in real time. Back at home, the atmosphere had shifted into something quieter than tension. More like exhaustion that nobody knew how to name. Greg stopped bringing up the cabin entirely. Not because he had accepted it, but because there was nothing left in it for him to argue against. Denise stayed distant in a way that didn't feel like anger anymore. More like avoidance. As if acknowledging me too directly meant acknowledging everything else. Even Kelsey moved differently around the house. Not afraid. Just aware. Like she had learned that silence sometimes meant something was happening underneath it. One afternoon, Greg asked me to sit with him in the living room. No urgency. No confrontation. Just a tired gesture toward conversation. I talked to Wade, he said. I didn't respond right away. That name still carried too much residue. He's trying to stabilize things, Greg continued. Selling assets. Renegotiating loans. A pause. Then quieter. He might lose his license permanently. I nodded slightly. I know. Greg looked at me like he expected something more from that response. Anger. Sympathy. Something emotional that would anchor the moment. But I didn't have anything left to give to Wade's situation, so I simply said, that's the consequence. Greg leaned back, rubbing his face with one hand. I keep thinking, he said slowly, if I had just asked one more question. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because the rest of it was already sitting between us. If I had just asked one more question. If I had just checked one document. If I had just slowed down. But regret doesn't rewind anything. It only clarifies what was already decided. A few days later, Margaret called again. Her voice had the same controlled calm she always used, but there was a softness underneath it now. The criminal investigation regarding Wade has progressed, she said. I stepped outside automatically, closing the door behind me. They've confirmed intent evidence tied to the forged notary stamp, she continued. The district attorney is moving forward with felony charges. I exhaled slowly. So it's officially criminal now, I said. Yes, she replied. A pause. Then she added, there's also something else. That phrase always meant something heavier was coming. Wade has entered a structured repayment agreement with Ridgeline settlement terms. It will likely take over a decade to fully resolve. I sat down on the porch steps, not because I was overwhelmed, but because there was nowhere else to put that information. 10 years, for something that had started as a shortcut, as confidence, as assumption, and now stretched forward like a long, unavoidable shadow. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. The wind picked up slightly through the trees, not strong enough to feel dramatic, just enough to remind me the world still moved without asking for permission. Later that week, I went back to the cabin again, this time not for silence, but for clarity. I walked through every room slowly, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The slight unevenness of the floorboards, the way the porch creaked differently depending on where you stepped, the small repairs I had made over the last 2 years that now blended into the structure, like they had always been there. Nothing felt fragile. Everything felt maintained, not preserved like a museum, but lived in, the kind of place that survives because someone keeps choosing to take care of it. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table Grandpa built, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, not saying anything specific, just present, like memory doesn't leave rooms where it was repeated often enough. That evening, Kelsey surprised me again. She showed up without warning, holding a small notebook and a pen. I'm trying to draw the lake, she said. We sat together on the porch while she sketched. Quiet, no questions, no tension, just the sound of pencil on paper and water moving far in the distance. After a while, she spoke without looking up. Mom and Dad don't talk about you the same way anymore. I glanced at her. How do they talk? She hesitated. Like you're separate, she said carefully. Like you're not part of the argument anymore. I understood what she meant. I wasn't inside the conflict now. I was outside it. A fixed point they had to work around instead of through. That night, after she left, I stayed on the porch longer than usual. The sky had turned deep blue, almost black at the edges. The lake reflected nothing anymore, just absorbed light. And I thought about something Grandpa had once said, long before any of this mattered. Family is not who agrees with you. It's who still stands after the disagreement ends. Back then, I hadn't understood it. Now I did. And I wasn't sure it made things easier, but it made them clear. And clarity, I was learning, was its own kind of weight. By the time summer arrived, life didn't feel like it was after the conflict anymore. It felt like it had simply moved into a new shape. The kind of shape you only notice once you've already adapted to it. Greg went back to work in a limited capacity, not rebuilding what he lost, but trying to stabilize what remained. Denise took extra shifts at the pharmacy, not out of necessity alone, but because being busy seemed easier than sitting with quiet thoughts that had nowhere to go. And Kelsey, she changed in smaller ways. She asked fewer questions about family conversations, but she started spending more time at the cabin, without being told, without asking, just showing up like it had always been part of her life too. One afternoon, she arrived with a backpack and a sketchbook. I told Mom I was studying. She said casually, stepping onto the porch. I raised an eyebrow. And are you? She smiled slightly. Kind of. We didn't talk about everything anymore. That phase had passed. Now we talked around things. Life, school, weather on the lake, the way the trees change color depending on the time of day. It was quieter, but not empty. Then, one morning, Margaret called again. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in a while. Finality. The criminal case against Wade has reached its conclusion, she said. I paused mid-step on the porch. Okay, I said slowly. What happened? He accepted a plea arrangement, she replied. Reduced charges, misdemeanor level, contingent on restitution and compliance. I exhaled. So it was over in the legal sense. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just processed, filed, closed. And Ridgeline? I asked. Fully compensated through settlement enforcement, she said. They've withdrawn all remaining claims. A pause. Then she added, he's essentially financially immobilized for the foreseeable future. I didn't respond immediately, because I wasn't sure what response made sense anymore. At some point, the story stops being about escalation and starts being about what's left after it. That weekend, Greg asked if he could come to the cabin. Just him. No conversation about why. No explanation beyond a simple, I want to see it. We sat on the porch in silence for a long time before he spoke. I used to think ownership meant control, he said. I didn't interrupt. He looked out at the lake. But it doesn't, he continued. It just means responsibility. And I didn't want that responsibility. I wanted convenience. He let out a slow breath. That's what I missed. I nodded slightly. Because there was nothing to argue with. No correction to make. Just recognition. After a while, he added, You've handled this better than I expected. I looked at him. That sentence could have meant a lot of things, but I didn't take it as praise. Just observation. I didn't handle it, I said. I followed what was already set up. He nodded slowly. Still, he said, you didn't break it. That stayed in the air for a moment. Not heavy. Just true. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Wade wrote a letter, not to the court, not to lawyers, but to me. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address that mattered anymore. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on the kitchen table for a full hour before touching it. When I finally did, the tone surprised me. It wasn't defensive or strategic. It wasn't even really an apology in the way people usually expect one. It was more like exhaustion put into sentences. He admitted he made assumptions, that he trusted speed over certainty, that he believed access meant authority, and that he underestimated what had been set in place long before he ever entered the picture. The last line was simple. I thought I was stepping into something open. I didn't realize it was already protected. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not because it changed anything, but because it clarified something I already knew. Some outcomes don't need emotion to validate them. They just need time to complete. That evening, I sat on the porch alone. The lake was calm again, the kind of calm that doesn't feel temporary anymore. Kelsey's sketchbook was on the table beside me, half-finished drawing of the shoreline, lines still in progress. I looked at it and thought about how everything here had layers now. What it looked like, what it meant, what it survived, and what it refused to become. I realized something then. This wasn't the story of taking something back. It was the story of something never being successfully taken at all. It had only been tested, and it had held. I closed the sketchbook gently and looked out at the water until the sky shifted from gold to dark blue. And for the first time, I didn't replay anything in my head. I just stayed where I was.